Retirement was supposed to be a break from the chaos of the force. After all, wasn't that what people said about life after duty? It hadn't felt that way to Nick, who found himself alone most days with only his dog, Rambo, for company. Life slowed to an aching crawl until one day his old friend, Lonnie, rang up with a suggestion so wild that Nick barely hesitated. A trip to Russia, to the infamous Dyatlov Pass, where 9 hikers vanished mysteriously decades ago. The fresh air will do you good, Lonnie had insisted. And with that, Nick and Rambo packed up, heading into the wild unknown. Their journey took them to a desolate village untouched by modern tourism. It was the kind of place where the air itself seemed to carry secrets. Villagers stared as they loaded their snowmobiles, a chill in their gaze that left Nick uneasy. Their guide, Andrei, warned them that the pass was no ordinary trail. "The land here, it does not rest," he muttered cryptically, glancing over his shoulder. Nick shrugged off the comment, but Rambo seemed on edge, sniffing the air as if he, too, sensed something beyond the snow and trees. As night fell over the camp, the world transformed. The biting cold wrapped around them like a vice, and the stillness was eerie. The crackling of the fire was the only sound until a faint, haunting flute melody drifted through the air. Nick thought Lonnie was playing a prank until he radioed him, only to find both Lonnie and Andrei were oblivious to the sound. Rambo, however, was on high alert, growling as the tune grew louder. Panic started to creep in when Nick noticed Andrei's old compass spinning uncontrollably, the needle pointing toward Rambo no matter which way it was turned. A pulsating glow emerged from the trees, crimson and ominous. One by one, red orbs appeared, flickering like some sort of spectral warning. Nick felt his heart race as he stared, entranced, unable to look away as the lights twisted and spun in unnatural patterns above the treetops. He felt a warmth run down his face and realized his nose was bleeding. Rambo snapped him out of it with a sharp bite to his arm, grounding him back to reality. "Good boy, Rambo," Nick whispered, gripping the dog's fur to steady himself. The lights vanished as quickly as they'd appeared, leaving Nick shaken. But the real horror began when he saw the side of Andrei's tent bulge and heard muffled screams. Whatever had manifested in those crimson lights was now far too close, and as Nick raced to his friend's aid, he realized they might have stumbled into a place where spirits roam freely. Their survival now rested not in their strength, but in their ability to evade whatever haunted these woods. I rushed over to Andrei's tent, Rambo growling low beside me. The tent was shaking, and I could see shadows moving frantically inside, like Andrei was wrestling with something. I yanked the zipper open, but there was no one inside. Just an empty, undisturbed sleeping bag and some scattered supplies. The air was thick and cold, biting through my jacket. I looked back at Rambo, who was staring at a spot just beyond the tent, his eyes locked on something invisible. Suddenly, a strange whisper cut through the silence. It was low, barely audible, but it crawled through the air, surrounding us. The voice was soft yet chilling, as if it were seeping up from the ground itself. I strained to make out the words, but they were twisted, warped, and just beyond comprehension. "Lonnie," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Did you hear that? Silence?" I grabbed my flashlight and swung the beam around, but all I could see was a dense wall of trees, their branches stretching like skeletal fingers into the darkness. The silence was thicker than before, pressing down like a weight on my shoulders. It was as if the whole forest had gone silent to listen. Rambo suddenly bolted, charging toward the tree line. I stumbled after him, slipping in the snow. My heart hammered as I tried to keep up, the beam of my flashlight bouncing erratically as I ran. The trees seemed to close in around us, towering shadows that felt alive, watching. Then, just ahead, I saw him. Lonnie stood in the clearing, his back to me, completely still. The red orbs from earlier floated above him, casting an eerie glow that painted the snow in unnatural colors. He didn't seem to notice me, or Rambo, who was now barking furiously, trying to snap him out of whatever trance he was in. "Lonnie," I shouted, my voice breaking the silence. But he didn't move. I stepped closer, my heart pounding, as I reached out to touch his shoulder. As soon as I did, he turned slowly, his face expressionless, his eyes dull. His lips moved, but no sound came out, only the faintest hint of a hum that matched the chilling melody from earlier. And then, without warning, he let out a piercing scream, one so raw and primal that it sent shivers down my spine. It echoed through the trees, cutting through the silence like a knife. The red lights flared, pulsing with his scream, and then shot off in every direction, vanishing into the darkness. The music faded, replaced by a deafening silence. Lonnie collapsed into the snow, gasping, his face pale and covered in a cold sweat. What was that?" he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't have an answer. The only thing I knew was that we had to get out of there. "We need to leave," I said, pulling him up. "Whatever's out here, it isn't just the cold or the altitude. There's something wrong about this place." We stumbled back toward the campsite, dragging Lonnie with us. The silence was almost worse than the music. It pressed in from all sides, heavy and suffocating. Rambo stuck close to us, growling at the slightest rustle, his ears alert, every muscle tense. When we finally made it back to the tents, Andrei was gone. His tent was wide open, the snow undisturbed around it. There were no tracks, no sign of struggle. Just the eerie quiet, as if he had vanished into thin air. I stared at the empty tent, my mind racing. One moment, Andrei had been right there, and now nothing. Just an empty, open flap and untouched snow. Lonnie and I exchanged a glance, the same thought crossing both our minds. Andrei hadn't left willingly. "We're not alone out here," Lonnie whispered, his voice hoarse, eyes darting to the shadows in the trees. Before I could respond, that strange hum began again, faint at first but growing louder. It wasn't coming from any direction, it was everywhere, vibrating in the trees, in the ground, in the air. Rambo bristled, standing protectively in front of us, but his ears were pinned back, as if even he knew he was powerless against whatever this was. In a moment of clarity, I grabbed my backpack, throwing in whatever supplies I could. "We have to go, now." Lonnie didn't argue. He was already breaking down his tent in a frenzy. The hum grew louder, and just as we finished packing, the red lights reappeared, floating just beyond the tree line, watching. Then, as if in response to our frantic packing, something stepped out from behind the trees. It wasn't Andrei. The figure was tall and shadowy, its features obscured by a dark haze. Its eyes were like the red orbs, glowing and hollow, and its mouth twisted in an unnatural, grotesque grin. The creature moved slowly, each step heavy and deliberate, as if it were savoring our fear. It extended a long, spindly arm, its fingers tapering into claws, gesturing for us to come closer. "Run," I muttered, barely able to breathe. Lonnie didn't hesitate. He bolted into the trees, with Rambo and me close behind. The forest was a blur of darkness and snow as we ran, the creature's hum chasing us, growing louder with each step. The red lights darted through the trees, guiding us deeper into the forest, their glow pulsating like the beat of a heart. I stole a glance over my shoulder and saw the figure gliding after us, its eyes burning through the darkness. It was fast. I felt my lungs burning, every muscle in my body screaming, but I knew stopping meant certain doom. Just as I felt my strength waning, the trees opened up, and we stumbled into a clearing. In the middle of the clearing was something I hadn't seen before, a stone altar, ancient and covered in moss, with strange symbols carved into its surface. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something metallic, like blood. The creature stopped at the edge of the clearing, watching us with those hungry, red eyes. It hesitated, as if something in the clearing repelled it. Lonnie collapsed onto the altar, gasping for breath, while Rambo circled us protectively. "What is this place?" Lonnie whispered, his voice barely audible. I didn't know, but something told me this altar was old, far older than anything we could comprehend. It felt like a boundary, a line that even that creature wouldn't cross. But we didn't have time to contemplate it further. The creature began to circle the clearing, its movements slow and methodical, never taking its eyes off us. I could feel its rage, like a physical force pressing in on us. As the creature completed its circle, it let out a deafening roar, a sound that shook the trees and sent Rambo into a frenzy. The red lights swirled around it, merging with the shadows until the creature was nothing more than a dark blur, its shape distorted and monstrous. I realized then that this wasn't just some random entity, it was something ancient, something bound to this forest, feeding off fear and isolation. I realized then that this wasn't just some random entity, it was something ancient, something bound to this forest, feeding off fear and isolation. In a final, desperate move, I grabbed Lonnie's arm. "We have to get to the other side of the altar. Maybe it's a passage." Lonnie looked at me, wide-eyed, but he nodded. Together, we scrambled to the far side of the altar, hoping against hope that whatever power was in this place could protect us. As we crossed the altar's edge, the hum suddenly stopped. The silence was so complete it felt like my ears had gone numb. The creature let out a guttural scream of frustration, the red lights flaring one last time before winking out like dying embers. In the dim moonlight, I saw its shadow writhe, its form stretching and warping as it tried to breach the invisible barrier. But it couldn't reach us. The thing let out one last, hollow wail, then faded into the darkness, retreating back into the trees. The air felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. Rambo, sensing the change, relaxed slightly, though his ears remained alert. Lonnie and I stayed there for a long time, catching our breath, letting the silence wash over us. When we finally felt safe enough to leave, we did so without looking back, our steps quick and quiet as we moved through the forest. By the time we made it back to civilization, the sun was beginning to rise, casting a golden light over the landscape. But neither of us spoke about what had happened, the memory too raw, too terrifying to confront just yet. It was only later, after we had returned home, that I learned the truth. The forest where we had camped was rumored to be haunted, a place where travelers disappeared without a trace, their spirits trapped in the endless maze of trees. They called it the Whispering Woods, a place of ancient rituals and dark energies. Andrei was never found.